Hi all, this is chapter 2 of my series on queen forks. I will begin with the theme introduced in the end of the first chapter, which is loosening the forking square by capturing its defender. Here it's white's turn. White has the move queen g4 check, but right now that's not a good option because that forces the exchange of queens, after which black will have a better endgame. Notice that the black queen is overworked. It protects both rooks and also g4. This suggests simplification. White plays rook captures rook. After queen captures rook, black c8 rook is loose, and the g4 square, which was protected by the queen, is now unprotected. White can play queen g4 and win the rook on c8. In this position, black is behind only by 2 points of material, but white looks much better. In fact, white has a forced mate in 5. Please pause the video and see if you can find it. It involves a queen fork. Well, white starts with queen h1, check. And king g8 is kind of forced because black cannot interpose with his rook, otherwise queen a8 will be checkmate. So after king g8, black has been set up for the fork. Queen g1 wins black's rook. Now king f8 or king h7 either way leads to checkmate. For example, if king h7, queen captures rook, king h6, queen g7 check, king h5, and queen g5 checkmate. Here again, it's white to play. Use the same idea of moving the king onto a square where it could be vulnerable, and then poking the king and a loose piece. Black has a loose bishop on d5, which could be forked if the king moved to h7. This is easily achieved by queen c8 check, and it forces the king to h7, after which queen f5 check wins the bishop. Pause the video and see if you can find white's best shot in this position. It is to be observed that queen e8 check forks black's king and rook. The only obstacle in the way is the bishop on e5. This can be attacked by pushing the f-pawn, and every piece flees when attacked by a pawn. So f4, and black decided not to save his bishop, but instead to save his rook by playing rook e7. White played f4 captures bishop, black recaptured, and white won a bishop at the cost of a pawn. In this position, it's white to play. Black's knight has just forked white's queen and rook, so it looks like black will win one of them in exchange for his knight. However, since the fork doesn't involve the king, white doesn't have to go on the defensive straight away. He can instead counterattack. Note the precarious position of the black king. Also note that queen d4 forks the bishop on g7 and the knight on e3. I think this is more than enough for you to find the solution. Hope you came up with the sequence bishop captures g7, check, king captures g7, and then queen d4. The point to take away from this example is to always be mindful of checks and forcing moves at your disposal. Unless a fork involves the king, your options are not merely limited to saving the pieces. They can even be used to counterattack. Sometimes, to get your pieces where you want them to go, you may need to capture your opponent's pieces with a check. Here white plays rook captures knight. Black should respond with king e7, but if it decides to play d7 captures rook, he gets into the fork with queen c6. This is quite an interesting position. Pause the video and see if you can find the best sequence for white. It is to be observed that the black bishop prevents the queen from coming to f6. If the queen were allowed to get there, it would fork black's king and rook. The king would have to move to e8, and then white would win both the rooks. Keeping this in mind, white starts with rook d7 check, with the idea of deflecting the bishop and clearing the path for the queen to reach f6. After bishop captures d7, queen f6 check, forces king e8, after which white can take both the black rooks and go on to have an easy win. Always be on the lookout for loose pieces. They are almost always prone to a fork. If queen g4 would check the black king, it would fork the king and rook. This can only be done by opening the g-file, and the easiest way to deflect a pawn is to capture a piece which it protects. Hence, to open the g-file, white plays rook captures bishop. And after the g-file is opened, queen g4 works. Have a look at this position. Black's queen can check the white king from b1, but at the moment looks harmless since it won't attack any other piece or force a checkmate. Imagine what the board would look like without the pawn on b3. The same check, queen b1, would fork the king and bishop on b7. Now since you're familiar with how to deflect a pawn, I think you can see black's next move. Black starts with rook captures knight. After b3 captures rook, queen b1 is played, and white has two minor pieces for a rook. The same combination can be played in a different order as well. Black can start with queen b1, checking the king, and after the king moves, black can play rook captures knight, exploiting the pin on the b3 pawn. Either way, black has a bishop and a knight for a rook. You can use the same idea here. Peel open the g-file, and then play queen g4 to fork black's king and rook. White starts with knight f6 check, which in itself is a knight fork. This forces black to play g7 captures knight. Otherwise, queen h7 is made. After the g-file is opened, white can go ahead with the idea of queen g4, thus winning the exchange. In this puzzle, it's white to play. As you've seen in the last few examples, it's sometimes possible to open lines leading to a queen fork by opening files and diagonals. If you look at black's pieces, you'll notice that the d6 bishop is loose. Also notice that if the g7 pawn were removed, queen f6 would have forked black's king and bishop. The question for you is, how would you deflect the g7 pawn? You can pause the video and think about it for a moment. The best move for white is bishop d3. Now this threatens queen captures h7 checkmate, and the only way for black to defend his king is to play g6. White can now play a queen f6, winning black's bishop free of cost.